Lucas. Obrigado. Okay. Okay, hello everybody. We are at the, so hold on, at the 4th IBCI International Competition and Innovation Conference. And we are really, really glad to have with us Mr. Schrepel, Thibault Schrepel. Then we will have a very, the idea is to have a very an informal conversation about his book, Blockchain plus Antitrust. An amazing book, I must say. I have not finished the reading so far. It's, I mean, a 300-page book, if I'm not wrong. I'm in the middle, right? But I could try, I could vertically read it entirely, but now I'm studying it. You know what I mean, Thibault? And because it's very deep, very deep. So, but actually, this opportunity is to let myself and everybody who is watching us now learn a little bit more about what underlies the idea, the main ideas of the book, starting from the very question why you decided to write about blockchain, and then we can develop through the 3 main lines of the book.
Sure. First of all, it's very nice, always nice to be with you. And congratulations. I mean, I think the IBCI 4th event is the best, and I'm sure the 5th will be even better than the 4th. So looking forward to it. And I'm also very happy because you already made my day by calling the book by its actual title, which is Blockchain plus Antitrust, and not blockchain and antitrust, which is something that I get sometimes, because indeed we usually talk about law and technology. And this is something I'm trying to push back a bit. And this is why, and here answering your question, this is why I wanted to write a book on the subject, because what I see in law schools, generally speaking, and this is actually the way I was trained in law school, the way people are trained in Brazil, the way people are trained in the US, all over the world. We are trained to address legal, to address societal problems with the law, right? So first year in law school, we're going to tell you, well, the tenant is not paying the rent. You are the landlord. What do you do? And then you would say, well, I apply, you know, this article of the civil code if you're in France, or this case law if you're in the US, et cetera, et cetera. And what I came to realize is that, of course, you know, my first intuition, and if you are just halfway through the book, you are in part 2, which is where I indeed address, you know, the tensions between the two. And this is where I started my work on the subject. But then I came to realize, well, potentially blockchain is actually a great technology with a great potential. And we should try to also use antitrust in a way to protect its natural evolution and to foster the actual use of that technology. So the reason why I started to work on the subject was just, you know, because I was interested in it. I've read about it and I thought, well, why not writing one article on the subject? And then a second one, if you do, you know, abuses of dominance, then it's easy to do cartel. I mean, that's the natural way. But the reason why I wrote this book was the day I realized that I was actually just addressing the issues when I believed that the technology could be useful. And then this is the overall idea of the book, addressing the issues in a way to protect the technology on the one hand, but also in a way to protect antitrust on the other. Because I think it might become very complex to enforce antitrust if blockchain stays as it is. So this is the general idea.
Right, and you every paper you write, I must say to whoever is watching us, is I mean, is a matter of responsibility, you know, Thibault. That's why not only because this, but this makes strengthens my admiration to you, because every time I read, I learn a little bit about this story, you know, the history actually, and you tell us the history of blockchain, you know, where it began, and it's very, very interesting. And then through this, the origin of the blockchain, you go to see like the commonalities to some areas of the law, like antitrust. and you start to talk about the common ambition. So, and you stated the common ambition of blockchain, the community, I must say, is similar to the ambition of the antitrust community, so the competition community, right? And that is decentralization, right? And it's amazing because irrespectively of your school of reasoning, nobody can deny that a too much concentration of power, I mean, economic power and political power, leads to distortions in democracy, leads to distortion in the freedom exercise, right? So I think you've reached a point, that there is a true common ambition between antitrust and the blockchain community. But would you let us know a little bit more about the idiosyncrasies, but if we are talking about a common ambition, what would be the tensions? Why we are just only thinking of it now and not years before?
Sure. First, I wanted to say that this is indeed chapter 5 of the book. So the main structure is the following. Part 1 is about antitrust on the one hand and blockchain. So if you have, antitrust perspective or blockchain perspective, you can understand the other. Part 2 is about how we have some tensions. And part 3 is about how we deal with those tensions in a way to protect both. And I must say that indeed in chapter 5, which is the very last one in part 1 of the book, I do say that, in my opinion, the objective for antitrust should be to protect consumer, at least for now, because we know how to do it. But regardless of whether you think we should take more into consideration, the environment and social issues and racism and all that, we indeed, I think, can reach a common understanding that if it is not even possible to compete out there and to challenge, the incumbents, then regardless of the objective that you may want to assign, you won't be able to do that. And so the idea, it seems to me, is to free transactions from coercion, which is the definition that I give to decentralization, the ability to behave the way you want to behave. And so faced with this background, I then indeed study where we see some tensions between the two, because I think it would be a mistake to, on the one hand, think that the law is self-sufficient, although this is exactly what we've been told, in law school. And I'm told that some computer scientists seems to believe that code is good enough and that, the legal rules and standards are of no good use. And actually they come from centralized institutions, therefore they must be bad. This is a bit of what you had. If you go back in the forum, this is all in the known and public at the time when they discussed the creation of Bitcoin. You could see that this was very strong, this idea that code is good enough. And I think we see already that this is not the case. And so I'm going to try to be very specific in answering your question. Where do we see some tensions? We see some tensions when first blockchain is used to infringe antitrust in the real space. So for instance, I explore how you could use smart contracts to set up a nice cartel that will be run, in a semi-automatic way, where you could punish deviation and execute the entire cartel that way. So this is one. Second, another tension, which is when you do see antitrust infringement within blockchain ecosystems. And there, this is where you see that the code is not good enough. We have a few cases. I'm more than happy to discuss a few of those if you want me to, in which we have seen cartels and abuses of dominance within the ecosystem. So this is where, you need antitrust. And this is where, if you don't have antitrust, you will suffer from those practices. And we see also tensions because blockchain are distributed and decentralized. The decentralization relates to the control, and the distribution relates to the location. Where is the blockchain? Where is the data? And if indeed we talk about public permissionless blockchains such as Bitcoin and Ethereum and Cardano and a few others, we talk about public and permissionless blockchains, which are decentralized and distributed, which means that there is no one pilot in the cockpit, which means that if you want to apply the law, should you be a government or regulators, you have no place where to go. And here I'm not even discussing the issue of pseudonymity and the fact that only the public keys appear on the blockchain. And that, I believe, created tensions And you see that very clearly in US politics, by the way, in which you have US politicians saying that blockchain, is equivalent to the dark web, and you don't even know where to start. Therefore, the solution is to, cut internet for all the people using blockchain, or to ban Bitcoin, which is the Chinese approach. And I believe this is a tension to be resisted, because again, blockchain can achieve a lot of good things. And, for all of the antitrusters listening to us, why do you want to take blockchain into consideration and make it to the best of your interests? First reason, because blockchain are distributed and decentralized, meaning that there is no clear pilot, meaning that no pilot can actually take a blockchain in a way which is anti-competitive. So most of the abuses of dominance will go away, not all of them, but most of them. This is reason number one. And reason number two, blockchain aligns value creation with value capture, which is something that you do not see with the big tech companies. You will actually put the content out there, and they will capture most of the value. And with blockchain, this is not the case. And this, again, plays in the interest of users and consumers, and therefore in the interest of antitrust agencies. So this is, again, the overall picture, but I'm sure we're going to discuss a few of those cases in just a minute. But long story short, why do we want to talk about all that right now? Because if we don't, I fear two things. First, it might be too late, meaning that you don't even know where to start. So therefore, how do you enforce the law? Or we may find a solution, which is an extreme solution in which we ban the technology because we have no choice and we can't enter its technology. And I believe, again, this is to be resisted. And this is the reason why I wanted to write the book. While we still have just a few cases out there, and before we have, hundreds, if not thousands, of antitrust cases coming.
Very good. And you mentioned, I would love to hear a little bit about these cases that you mentioned about the bad use of wrong use of blockchain, the technology, right? But prior to this, there's a question that came to my mind, not now, but some years ago. That is related to the real ability of the traditional legal framework, or the dogmatic, the legal matrix, to actually regulate or to intervene, whatever the intervention is, antitrust regulation, so forth, the state intervention in this technological realm, cyberspace ecosystem. Sorry about the plane.
No worries. I'm used to it with you. One day I'll be in it and I'll be coming your way. So,
yeah, I'm sure. So, but the question, actually, it's like a kind of a pain in my mind. How can we make the legal commandment effective? Let's see. I'm sure you're going to explore this a little more. But how can we? I don't doubt about the ability of the technology to potentialize the results that antitrust is seeking for. I agree with you totally. But how can we make it real? Working in the protocol. Creating another language, or how can we combine effectively these two different communities or universes, if not writing a new story?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because
yes.
we have two different communities, very different. Both have manifestos, many of them. That's very interesting. Actually, in the blockchain side, we have many communities, right? And a big. I found very interesting to read one of the part of the manifestos that they mentioned that we are about to create a new civilization, and where the state's not welcome.
Yeah.
Right? How can we make it real?
Sure. So this is part 3 of the book, which you haven't read yet, in which I do try my best to explore in a very concrete way. What do you do? Should you be working for an agency or be an antitrust lawyer or a student in the space? And what do you do? Should you be a blockchain developer or a blockchain user or a blockchain miner? And so I think the challenge is the following. Again, sometimes you do want and most of the time, you do want the legal rules and standard to apply to blockchain because it actually benefits you as a blockchain user. And some other times it actually benefits the common good. So I think this idea to get rid of the rule of law is a very bad idea. And so you are referring to the Cypherpunk manifesto from 96. So this was prior to blockchain. But this idea has been very strong in the community that indeed, why should we rely on centralized institution? It should be that everything should be decentralized with no governance at all. We've seen that this is not how it happens. There is always governance emerging one way or the other. And so I think the challenge is indeed to make it work, meaning that how can we trust the law to intervene only when necessary and not in a way to shape the technology. And I see that as a strong temptation for lawyers. They always complain that they are lagging behind the tech. And I think this is a good thing, right? I'm not sure if we want lawyers to be ahead of the technology and to tell exactly, let's say blockchain communities how to design their own blockchain. And yet, if we are too far behind, some of us, the lawyers, will come with extreme solution, and this is not what we want. So to be very concrete, I propose what I called a law is code, but ex post approach, which is to create ways for the law, the rule of law, to intervene, but only when necessary. And of course, this is, I think the number one challenge when it comes to blockchain regulation, generally speaking, even outside of competition law. On the one hand, again, you do not want the governments to tell how to design blockchains. Otherwise, what you would say is that, private blockchains are best. And you know what? As a matter of fact, the big tech companies are even best because you know exactly where to go. You could go to Mark Zuckerberg, you can complain, you could put him in jail if you want to. That's very clear, where you should go and what you should do. But when it comes to Bitcoin, well, it's not clear at all where you could go. And in fact, no one can actually say, well, you know what, government, you're right. I'm going to change the blockchain to fit your desire, whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. And so how can we create those ways? This is what I explore again in part 3. I present some different technical solutions that we could implement so that we are able to apply the law, but only after something illegal has been committed within the ecosystem. So I'm more than happy to discuss, but it could get very technical, but you could use chameleon hashes. You could use ways to bypass immutability. You could use different architecture to actually design your blockchain. You could use Oracle, which are the tiny piece of software or hardware that will connect the real space with smart contracts. So you know that the law could intervene in between. And so end of the story, I'm not sure which one is best. And I think this is why we need cooperation. We need to test whether we do it using agent-based modeling or lab simulation or sandboxes and safe harbors in the real space. We need to test those solutions and see two things. One, is the solution effective? And if it is, do we see a strong willingness for the blockchain community to keep on using it? Because again, the best way to apply the law is to say decentralization has to go. We re-centralize everything. But then why should you use a centralized blockchain instead of just, a regular service or product? There is no reason why. So you do want to maintain what differentiates blockchain from the centralized space while having the power to intervene. And for that, I think we have no choice but to test what's the willingness of those communities.
Fantastic. Going a little back in your book, I'm not sure if I got it accurately, but I feel I had the impression when I was reading the story of the communities on cypherpunk, right?
Cypherpunks.
Yes, cypherpunks. Yes. You mentioned this is like how can I say that? I just missed the word. You mentioned like the mistrust, the distrust existing within that community against the lawyers and the state community, and vice versa, right? There are mistrust in both communities, if I understood right. And but later you explained the crisis you told us a crisis within the blockchain. A blockchain. I mean, I'm not sure if it was Ethereum or a blockchain, whatever it is.
Yes.
The first,
so
yes, the first.
First chapter is about
DOS bug. DOS
yes.
bug. You explained this crisis and how they solved the crisis. And I feel that you try to show to the reader that they are good guys, because who discovered the crisis was like a competitor of the mainframe, the main blockchain, right?
Yes.
And it told a lot to me because this matter of mistrust, like it might be a misunderstanding, a wholly misunderstanding about the technology and the community, right? In the end of the day, it's if we can educate both to tell them how good are they at some extent, they could work together. Do I learn accurately this?
Yeah. So
I mean,
so
tell us a little bit more about this ethical profile.
Sure. I'm going to try my best, but of course,
and it's kind of weird, odd to me because a person from the legal world to learn, and it caught my attention that an anarchist, like a cyber anarchist, is an ethical person.
Yeah. So several things. First, you are hesitating between cypherpunks and CryptoPunks because CryptoPunks exist, which is an NFT project. So those are those little characters that you may buy as NFTs. They are worth, almost 10 million each now. Anyway, that's a different thing. I'm more than happy to discuss NFTs and how it may actually help blockchain competing with the big tech companies, which again will play in the interest of antitrust agencies. But going back to the cypherpunks, so I indeed tried to explain how it came from, the DIY movement, which was part of the Californian culture in the 60s, how this was eventually converted into something very practical and technical, which was, encryption techniques so that to enable the individual. And the way the cypherpunks wanted to enable the individual was by allowing the individual to escape the state. And that morphed eventually into blockchain and decentralized communities. The idea being that if the cypherpunk failed because they thought that the state wouldn't apply within the cyberspace, when in fact we know that this is far from being true, laws very much apply within the cyberspace. So what they thought they would be doing is that instead of relying on the ID to hide behind digital identities, they will get rid of control. And if you go to the MIT Media Lab, where you do have the Bitcoin Foundation people, so most of the people coding the actual core software of Bitcoin, and discuss with them, what they will tell you is that you may have good ideas, but if they were to implement those ideas, they will actually get control over the Bitcoin blockchain. And they do not want that because control equals liability, and they fear that very much. So you see that there is indeed kind of a mistrust which exists. And what I explore in the book is that how it might be convenient for them to be able to rely on the rule of law. And so I explore in the very first chapter, or maybe the second chapter actually, the story of the how many. So how many was a person. We have no idea who the person is. And he woke up one morning, once again, in a van, and was just, checking the code of Bitcoin, and eventually came to realize that it was possible to double spend Bitcoins, meaning that I could send one Bitcoin to you and the exact same one to another person. And if you can do that, the value of Bitcoin has to be zero, because it means that you could just have one Bitcoin in your wallet and spend it over and over again. And so if that information was to become public, this would have been pretty much the end of it. And this wasn't something, in the early days of Bitcoin. This was in 2018. So, just 3 years ago. And indeed, he was a nice guy, also for financial reasons. He is actually saying in the forums that he was hoping for a little bonus when he actually told the people about it. And it's very interesting to see what he has done and who he has been in touch with and how they actually managed to patch the bug without telling the community, so that no one will actually be able to, double spend their own Bitcoin. And so the way they managed the entire crisis was done very carefully. It's very interesting when it comes to understanding where is the power within a blockchain, But my point here is that should you not be facing such a nice guy who would say to another Bitcoin, another blockchain, hey, by the way, yours as a bug, because it was working, I think, for Bitcoin ABC or another one, then you are in trouble, right? What if someone starts double spending those Bitcoins? And this is where you see that, once again, code is not good enough. Sometimes you do want to rely on legal rules and standards. So I think, for me, this is a fascinating story because you may think that those communities will actually try at all costs to evade the state. But I think what you see more and more is that there is an understanding that the law can be beneficial to them, but it doesn't mean that they are ready to accept, the way by which we apply the law and all the rules that we have. And so this is why, but you haven't read that because this is part 3. I actually tried to, close the circle at the very end of the book and say how we could actually use blockchain to decentralize regulators and policymakers. And I believe this is, something for a far distant future, but something that could first make regulators and policymakers more efficient, and also raise the willingness by those communities to accept the law and actually potentially work with it and design the law as well. And so I believe that until we do that, you're going to see a tension between decentralized and horizontal communities on the one hand, and vertical institution on the other. And that, you could try all you want to create cooperation, you're going to see tensions. And I think eventually the two have to curve a little bit so that, we can apply the law when necessary, and so that we can actually also decentralize regulators a bit. So this is, the overreaching idea and something I will research in the future and that I just explore in a few paragraphs.
Yeah, I mean, your argument is very strong, I would say, because as long as you give the sense of legitimacy to the regulated, to the communities, why not? Why not creating such a new frame to the regulation, right? And I'm just thinking in pencil now. Let's suppose if we happen to create like a pilot, a project pilot for like a regulation under a blockchain structure, would it be better in terms of mitigating public choice problems?
I think much better. Yes. For several reasons. In the space, in the space of competition law, as we both know, there are vested interests, and especially if you are active on Twitter, you will see that people disagree to the core of pretty much everything. I used to think that even, at least cartels were out of the battles, but it seems that it is not even out of the battles anymore, and that some people would say that cartel is actually good and excellent and we should have lots of cartels. So there is no consensus, which is something that saddened me very much, but I'm faced to see that. And against this background, what you see is that there are indeed public choice issues. First, private actors, they do have an interest in trying to capture what's happening and capture the regulation. This is something that I think we may see as we speak in Brazil when it comes to blockchain and the big banks. The Antitrust agency, CADE, has actually opened an investigation against a big bank in Brazil for refusing to open bank accounts to blockchain users. This was eventually dropped out, but the tribunal of the agency said last year, no way, you're going to reopen the investigation so we can actually see what's happening there. I don't have any inside information, but I believe that some of those banks may be active in trying to capture the regulator. So in case they will lose before the agency, at least they will have regulation on their side. So that's very interesting. And I mean, we see that over and over again. This is one type of capture. The second one is actually the capture by the regulator itself. And this, I believe, has never been so strong of a risk than it is for blockchain ecosystems. Let me give you just one example. DM, which is Facebook cryptocurrency, was announced now almost 2 years ago, and they are still working on it. And the day they announced it, or actually just, I think 2 or 3 days after, the European Commission said, well, that's very interesting. We're going to send you a questionnaire and asking for antitrust issues because we see lots of issues with your project. And I believe this is the first time the European Commission, at least to the best of my knowledge, is being so active and such an opponent to a technology that does not exist yet, right? And I think there are good reasons for that. First, there are indeed antitrust issues with DM and privacy issues to be fixed before it is put out there. But second, it also competes with the state, right? If you put a cryptocurrency out there, it competes with the fiat currency of the state. And so can we trust the state to actually regulate what competes with it? Lawrence Lessig, in his code book, said that we can't. And this is where, indeed, I think that an idea would be to use blockchain to build prediction markets and future key system to actually decentralize a bit of what's happening in the space. And, you know, the technology is ready. And I think agencies and governmental actions could actually use those techniques as we speak, and they could do it internally if they do not want, you know, to say in public that they are doing it. I'm totally fine with that idea. But so basically, what you see if you use prediction market is that you ask people to vote not for what they want, but for what they think will happen. So, you know, you will say, who's going to be the next president of the United States? You vote. If you're right, then you actually earn money because you will take the money of those who are wrong. And if you are wrong, you lose the money, which creates a strong incentive only to vote if you do have inside information, unless you enjoy losing money, in which case, you know, you may vote over and over again. And that has been transposed into a governance system in which you will say, well, I'm going to take the outcomes of those votes and I'm going to decide on electing the president based on the outcome, right? So you could say, who you think will be the best president to reduce carbon emission? Then you ask the people to vote, and the president with the, you know, the more probabilities is actually elected president of the United States. Some of the big tech companies are using that as a way, you know, to know which product to put out there, which new features they should integrate and all that. And I believe that you could do the exact same when it comes to antitrust agencies. You have a merger, you say, okay, what's the outcome of the merger? Will the price go up or go down? You vote. You could just ask the people within your agency to vote using, you know, private token built on top of blockchain. And I believe this might be a way to indeed get rid a bit about the public choice issue in which people try to capture, because if you capture such a system, then it costs a lot of money and potentially it creates an incentive for you not to capture the system, you know, a second time. So we do see that technical possibilities will actually open, you know, something which relates more to the substance and actually the core of our existing institution, which I think is fascinating. We used to think that it will be blockchain versus institution, and the more it goes, the more we see adoption by public institutions, and I think this is pretty much the future for those institutions.
Oh, amazing. Well, I read the book mainly when you explained about. Actually, I have read another paper from you where you explained about blockchain technology and you know, the applications like proof of work and proof of transaction, right? But I see a clear way to solve a problem we have here in the country, and I'm sure every country that inherited the continental European way of life, a bureaucratic way of life, could make beneficial use of it. For example, we could replace the public notary system by a blockchain with public chains, public keys actually, right? So it would be amazing and save a lot of money from everybody. So this is an application. And I can think in terms of applying the technology, I mean, ideally speaking, to a regulation or to a regulatory system. Maybe when we think of mitigating public choice problems, we could think of having a blockchain of regulators and anonymizing the regulator identity, you know, and putting some actually targets for himself or herself to regulate. So applying the law, reaching best levels of competitions for so. As long as you anonymize the identity, you mitigate up to the limit, I would say, the public choice personal problem, right?
Yeah, and you know what's fascinating with that, and I do address that in chapter 14, is that you quickly come to indeed what you just mentioned, which is that you do eventually have to make it clear what is the objective, right? Whether you want to use smart contract, whether you want to use future key and prediction markets, eventually you have to say, this is the objective, this is what I'm trying to measure, and depending on whether or not I can achieve that result, then I will change the course of my behaviors and actions and policies. And if only for that reason, I think we should actually invest in the space, because for now it is not exactly clear. Why? What are we trying to do? To protect the environment, now we are told. Okay, but if the prices go up, then what do you do? Is it good? Do you think that the low-income people should not access a product because it is good for the environment? Potentially, you may want to say yes, but to have it as a clear objective, I think will actually enable us to clarify what is the policy and what we are trying to achieve, instead of saying, well, everything, of course, because who's against protecting the environment? Who's against fighting against racism? Who's against protecting consumers? No one is against that if you are right in your mind, and yet you have some trade-off. And thinking about those systems is actually thinking about the trade-off. And I think we have to have the discussion, if only for that reason.
Yeah. The broader, I must say, the broader is the objective. You can do everything, right?
It seems to me. Yeah. Or maybe there is a way.
Welfare. Right? I seek the welfare. What is the welfare? Whose welfare?
Exactly. Yes. And if you need to compute that and put welfare into a system, then explain what is welfare. Prices, the quality of a product, citizenship, democratic values, and all that. So very interesting, times ahead of us, I think.
Yeah, and Thibault, do you see any similarity or any relationship between like the voting system within a blockchain to that idea of the quadratic voting? I mean,
yeah.
Do you see it? Because you mentioned many times Vitalik, right, in your book.
Yeah. And so indeed,
tell us about it, please.
So I mean, the basic idea. So first of all, quadratic voting, I think, was coined by Glenn Well. I think is the one who actually wrote a paper with Vitalik on that.
Yeah, actually, based on a Nobel Prize. I mean, what is the name of the 60s? Bill Vickery. I mean. Maybe.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. It's in the book.
So I was recently listening to a podcast with Russ Roberts. By the way, this is my favorite econ podcast. It's called Econ Talk. I found so many great ideas for research papers that I thought at the time were great. And then you write the paper and you realize it's maybe not so great, but different story. But so Glenn was invited, I think 1 or 2 months ago, and he was mentioning quadratic voting and saying that it is indeed very complex and there are lots of different variations. But my understanding of it is that it's a system in which basically you could use more than one vote in a sense, or you could get more weight to your vote, but this is exponential. So you might want to say, okay, I want to vote for this person, 1 vote, 1 token. But if you want to put 2 votes, then you have to spend, let's say, 4 tokens, and so on, which creates a system in which you may ask people to spend most of their voting capacities for the things that matters the most to them. And I believe that indeed the same could be transposed to blockchain, and if only for 2 reasons. First, if you are designing such system on top of a public permissionless blockchain, it means that there is no one behind it who could say, well, you know what, I don't like the outcome of the vote, I'm going to take my money back. Impossible to do that, which creates trust in the system, which is good. And also because if you do it on top of a blockchain, what you may do more easily than outside of it is to create a token which has no financial value, but which might be based on the reputation of you as a voter or of you as a citizen or member of the corporation. And this is a nice way that you could use to use or implement quadratic voting without having to put financial stakes into the game, because only your reputation will be at stake. And so this could indeed be pretty much used as an infrastructure for different ways of voting, which is, by the way, the basic idea of blockchain, right? It is an infrastructure that allows you to transact in a different way. And it might be that, it will allow you to do Uber and Airbnb and Google and Facebook in a way which is decentralized. We know that Twitter is working on such a social media. It will be called Blue Sky, and it will be a fully decentralized social media. So I think, this is the core of the idea behind it. Think about it as an infrastructure on top of which you can build voting systems, AI systems, algorithms, IoT, robots, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why I think the implications are quite phenomenal in the space.
Thank you. And last point for you to comment. You mentioned that someone can pick up a blockchain and artificially include some commands to work within it, right? And would it be related to, is that right to understand, like, for example, that I have a decentralized blockchain. Blockchain is decentralized by its nature, right? But it's not true to state that decentralization jeopardizes the ability to regulate it or to accept some impositive rules to govern that community. Is that right? So we can still have some governance standards, even if these governance standards should be accepted after a voting procedure, after a ballot inside the blockchain. But is that possible to create a impositive governance rule to be enforced, or not enforced actually, to be enforced within a blockchain?
Yeah, so I mean, I hope this is your last question, because this is a perfect last question.
Yes, it is.
Because this is how I actually conclude the book. I do say that if you implement those mechanisms, thanks to which you can actually enforce the law, or try to move blockchain into a certain direction, you could say that what you are doing is re-centralizing blockchain, because it means that, if it will be possible for the regulator to intervene and take information out of it or prevent transaction, in a way, what you are doing is that you are taking the ability to define what people can do on their own. And so I do see why you may want to say there is a tension between decentralization and regulation on the one hand, and yet I believe this is possible to maintain decentralization within the blockchain ecosystems, because here you have to make a distinction between different layers within a blockchain. And it is not because you re-centralize a tiny bit one layer so that you can apply the rule of law that it will impact all of the other layers on top of it. And so should it be possible for the regulators to intervene one way or the other, it doesn't mean that the use of the software running on top of those blockchain will be centralized. Far from that. And so here again, as you were mentioning, we could think about a way in which we will preserve most of the decentralization, in which we would say to the regulator, all you could do is propose a vote and ask the blockchain community if they want to take this information out to, ban this user. Or you could think about something which is a bit more coercive, meaning more centralized, in which the regulator will be able to intervene. You could say it's once a year, or you could say, this is the burden of proof that I want from you. And again, there are different ways, and I think there is no right and wrong solution, except for the fact that if you re-centralize blockchain too much, you will kill the tech, because it won't be able to survive by being different from the big tech companies and all the companies. And this is why I conclude the book saying that all of that, of course, as it's a matter for scientific research, but at the end of the day, I think it is really art, because it is trying to find a balance which is so fragile within the ecosystem and so unknown to all of us, that we have to explore and potentially be creative in the space, find new solutions, whether they are technical or legal solutions. And I think, the best art is actually coming from someone which is an outsider in the space and doing something which is kind of new in that space, which is why we have to work with computer scientists as lawyers and vice versa.
Thank you very much, Thibault. Amazing discussion, amazing book. I recommend to everybody who is watching us, and I would recommend to my students, to my colleagues. Thank you for the picture.
putting the picture and the QR code. It's open access, by the way, so feel free to just acquire it online.
Yeah, important information, open access. So thank you very much, Thibault. Again, it was amazing. I hope to see you in the other panels, and thank you for the support to the event this year, and as always, and thank you for providing what is the name actually? The Amsterdam Law and Technology Institute.
Right? Indeed. So I just wanted to say, I'm very sorry for the people listening to us, because you're going to hear about me tomorrow and on Thursday. But this is the only time you will hear about my research, because now what I will do is to moderate some fantastic panels. So be sure to come back. And again, thank you very much, Eduardo. As you know, you are amongst the few friends in the community, and it's always a great pleasure to spend time with you.
Likewise, my friend. See you later.
See you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.